Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll tell you about all the domestic surveillance programs that you've never even heard of. One that allows authorities to take your personal property almost at will. We'll explain how conservative attacks on the IRS have left the agency unable to do its job, and we'll tell how corporate America is trying to influence your political ideology through clever new PR scams. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, remember, you just stepped in to the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The IRS has always been one of the Republicans' favorite targets, but their endless attack on the agency have led to enormous budget cuts that are preventing the IRS from being able to do their job at all. Joining me now to talk about that is Howard Nations. Howard, the IRS is quick to go after mom and pop when they don't pay an extra $100 on their tax bill, but they're completely, utterly unwilling, maybe unable, to go after all of this new dark money that's showing up in these PACs that are completely illegal. Explain that to us.
Well, the story, Pap, is that not only are they unwilling, but they're actually intimidated. The IRS, hard to believe, but the IRS is actually intimidated to go after these 501c4 welfare organizations that are nonprofits. And they're just spending money any way they want to now. The study by the Center for Public Integrity showed that in the November 2014 Senate races alone, dark money, that is money that is undisclosed, the source, $130 million went into the Senate races in 2014, supporting candidates and bashing opponents. And these are groups, the social welfare groups, are getting preferred tax status. But as part of that, they're barred from politics being their primary activities.
What are they supposed? Here's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to engage in social issues, social welfare, not politics. It's very specific. You may not engage in politics, and if you do, it is a potential felony.
Yes.
Okay. So now here's what's really amazing to me. It's not just Republicans that are cutting the IRS down to where they can't go after these groups. Obama cut their budget by about $330 million. So they don't even have the ability to go after some of these groups.
That's true. They've almost abandoned their responsibility. Since 2010, since Citizens United, when all this really started springing up, the IRS has only begun 26 organizational audits. And there are 1 million nonprofits, and there are 100 nonprofits that are directly, absolutely, unequivocally involved in spending tens of millions of dollars. They're seldom monitored. They operate as political committees. They have no fear of reprisal now. And of course, it all comes out of Citizens United, the 2010 Supreme Court, which allowed unlimited spending by nonprofits. And they don't have to disclose their donors. And in 2012, there were $336 million spent in those races compared to $17 million spent before Citizens United in 2006.
It's safe to say that virtually anything goes. Once you have set up a 501c4 or 501c5 or 501c6, and that has to do with labor unions and trade unions and trade groups. Once you get that set up, the take by the Center for Public Integrity is anything goes. You can spend it however you want, and we have an IRS that is unwilling to do a damn thing about it. Now, did I get that right?
You got it exactly right. In fact, Senator Bill Nelson from Florida said, quote, "The IRS is not doing its job," end quote. There are obvious and flagrant abuses by social welfare groups. The IRS is intimidated.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Howard. You've talked about this before. I think we've talked about this issue of this whole fantasy that the IRS was going after conservative groups. First of all, it was proven that was nonsense. what was happening is you had conservative groups bringing in these applications at a rate we have never seen before because they wanted to use that PAC money to illegally put behind candidates. So all of a sudden it made it look like the IRS was targeting the conservative groups, but the conservative groups were outnumbering even moderate groups by about 3-1 in applying for a 501c4 status. But nevertheless, the media, unable to even understand that apparently, tried to make it look like there was some kind of scandal involved and the IRS was going after conservative groups. It was nonsense.
Well, the result of it has been that Congress has taken off after the IRS, and specifically after this section of the IRS, which is supposed to, it is their job to investigate these organizations to make sure that they're complying with the tax laws. But when they did start investigating them, big shock, the division of the IRS that's supposed to investigate organizations to see if they're complying, the 501c4s, to see if they're complying with the tax laws, that's the people, of course, they went after. But they went after conservatives disproportionate to liberals, but the conservative applications were greatly disproportionate to liberals. The result of this all has been, according to the IRS commissioner, there have been hiring freezes, job losses, the taxpayer numbers are rising while their employees are declining. But here's the most important thing the commissioner of the IRS said: we are leaving billions of dollars uncollected as tax revenue as a result of the Congress systematically weakening the IRS and especially targeting the exempt organization division.
Yeah, okay, so we can't build roads. We can't change a water delivery system and sewer system in our infrastructure that is archaic. We can't build power grids. We can't pay for Social Security advances. We can't pay for any safety nets. We can't even pay for veterans when they come back from overseas to get medical care. But we're unwilling to go after slick, illegal politicos that are hiding what they're doing behind 501c4s, taking that money, giving it to the conservative politician of their choice or the Democratic politician of their choice. And we're unable to do anything like that because we have just destroyed the power of the IRS to do it.
We have. The number of IRS people, staff employees that were cut, 13,000 cut since the 2010 scandal. And they've got a decrease in training. They cut the training budget, this is amazing. They cut their training budget from $7 million to $500,000. And they quote the tax attorneys in this investigation, tax attorneys that deal with the IRS, as saying that there's a reduction in the quality of work. And they've especially cut the budget for the nonprofit division. They just crippled the IRS.
Politics just rolls on, and the average American public, they have no idea what's even happening to them. This is one of those stories the media doesn't report. Thank you, Howard. Appreciate you joining me.
Hey, my pleasure, Mike. Thanks.
The domestic spying programs of the government are pretty well known by now: wiretapping, intercepting phone calls, data tracking. But there's some other spying operations that are happening and you probably aren't aware of. I have Kevin Gostala with me now to explain what's happening. Kevin, DEA's got quite a scam going. It's amazing when you can simply take property away from individuals without ever there being a crime. You did a great job covering this. I just really liked your approach to it. Lay the story out for us a little bit.
Well, I think that given all the scandal around the National Security Agency, with all the disclosures from contractor Edward Snowden, that there had been a lot of focus on spying, and I think rightfully so. But what's interesting about this disclosure about the license plate readers that the DEA is using is that there's a purpose for this, and it really shows how pernicious surveillance can be, because the goal that the DEA has laid out, as the American Civil Liberties Union was able to figure out, is that they want to seize property. And that is the goal for having this network of local law enforcement, networking between state, federal, and local levels of law enforcement, that they want to use these license plate readers to make it easier to seize property.
So a lot of it is about just seizing property. Explain what the license plate reader is. Give me that system of license plate reading.
Well, it's a camera, and this camera system, as I presume, they set up these stations along these roads, and when people come by, they can detect, and it all goes into a database. And also, one of the things from like targeting these people is that they can, once they have their information and everything, that's one thing. But also with these agents on the side of the road, as they're targeting these people, they're engaged in profiling. That's the other thing that's remarkable, because we have the ACLU story, but I also linked it back to the Washington Post's great series on asset forfeiture that was done last year, which was really good investigative journalism on their part into Justice Department records, and seeing how they actually profile drivers looking for behaviors that they say are quote unquote similar to drug dealers.
What would be kind of a profile, Kevin? First of all, they're doing this because, again, they can take property without there ever being an arrest. I think that's something people miss. They don't understand, how do you take somebody's car, how do you take their motorhome, how do you take their boat without ever making an arrest. So we start there, and so then the next point is, what are the things that they say might be significant in determining that we're going to profile somebody?
Yeah, so I think it's actually normal behavior. That's the thing, is that so many of us could engage in these behaviors and we wouldn't know that we were acting like drug dealers. It's like the officer comes up to you and you're more nervous than he thinks is usual. Or you're less nervous. Maybe you're so cool-tempered that he thinks it's really odd that you're handling him so well. Or this person's dressed in attire that they identify with the attire of a drug dealer. Like maybe you're wearing jewelry or something and it looks unusual. These behaviors that are very similar, that are just really normal behaviors that somehow are chalked up to drug dealer behavior.
In your article, you did it was dark window tinting, air fresheners, trash in the vehicle. Let's see, long trips without a lot of baggage, profusion of energy drinks, talkative or quiet drivers, as you just pointed out, designer apparel that the driver might be using, and multiple cell phones. So this is a list, you didn't make the list up, this is a list that they use when they're trying to say, hey, maybe we can profile this driver and then maybe we can take their car. Isn't that kind of how the system works?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the significant thing that you really called attention to in this part here is that there is no arrest happening. There is really no suspicion of a crime. They just assume that it's connected or presume that it's connected to drug activity, and then they're able to seize it. And now it becomes your problem. If you want to get your property back, it's up to you to prove that you were not guilty, which can be quite a task for someone.
In other words, the burden shifts, which is unheard of. The burden then, it shifts to the claimant saying, hey, you've taken my car. I'd like to get it back, and now they have to prove that A, they're not a drug dealer, and B, none of the things in line here would have had any significance. Things like tinted windows or air fresheners or what they were wearing that day has any impact on the taking of the car. So it is kind of a ridiculous standard. Let me ask you this, Kevin. You, in your article, by the way, very well done, just a very good article. Everybody will read this. You've got the discussion about dirt box devices that are used in airplanes, and they mimic cell phone towers. Tell us how, this is crazy. Airplanes flying over us with these things called dirt boxes. Explain what that is.
Yeah, these devices, basically they take like Cessna aircraft. They have these devices, as you say, dirt box inside of them. They're used mostly around airports, but the U.S. Marshals Service covers, when you think of like the range that they cover nearby airports, it covers such a vast part of the United States that almost all of the civilian population could be swept up in this dragnet surveillance that they're basically doing, which they say is just around airports. So I put that in there because the license plate tracking network is another dragnet, and then we have this Cessna aircraft dragnet.
Yeah, I see.
And it's interesting to see the interrelationships with all of these dragnets.
Yeah, one thing that's in about 30 seconds, what's your take on this? A lot of this is dependent on how qualified the officer is in determining what's suspicious activity. With all the latest news on officers, it's pretty scary to think that actually might be the case.
Well, I think that's where you get into the issue of racial profiling, where you see that disproportionately you've got minorities that are being targeted. And they're the ones that I think that these agents are going to look at and say, well, you're not talking to me that much. There must be something about you that makes you a drug dealer, so I'm going to take your car.
Yeah, and hope you don't have too many energy drinks inside your car, or hopefully you're not dressed in rap apparel. I mean, it's kind of what it's come to. Listen, Kevin, great article. Thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you.
Corporations have never been shy about spending money to buy politicians, but lately they've decided that buying favors isn't enough, and now they're spending money to buy your opinions. Joining me now to talk about the latest corporate PR scam is Seth Katz. Seth, corporate America has figured out that low information America is so gullible, they're so impressionable, and they're so easily moved towards whatever issue you want to move them towards, that they're almost giving up on the lobbying standpoint, and they've started ad campaigns to change public minds. I think of BP on the Gulf Coast. We'll talk about that. What is your take on what's going on out there with this, massive, massive influx of money into PR firms all over the country?
Mike, it's amazing the amount of money being spent on PR and advertising by big business in America instead of lobbying. In the last 4 years, the amount of money has really taken a big boom, and these companies, they've figured out that if they can sway public opinion and bolster their lobbying efforts by having the public be tricked by this junk advertising. In our business, we have judges that have to serve as gatekeepers to keep out junk science. Here, it's junk advertising. No one knows who's behind it. This grassroots America that's really being funded by a big corporation, and the goal is to sway public opinion and to get the public to write to their senator, to write to their congressman. It's just a different form and a way to supplement lobbying that doesn't require the disclosures that true lobbyists have to make when they make contact with the legislature.
Let's put it in perspective. Let's take one of the real dark money groups, the Edelman Group. Now, they're a PR firm, Washington, New York, Europe, they're all over the world. Just in the petroleum arena alone, I think it was $350 million went into their pocket just from the petroleum industry, okay? Now, what did they do with that? They went out and they told the American public fracking is just fine. That the BP oil spill, well, gee whiz, BP wasn't really responsible. So what do you see from the standpoint of pharmaceutical cases that you handle all the time, and I handle them all the time too? What is it you see happening with these huge organizations, these PR groups, in pharmaceutical cases?
The direct-to-consumer marketing alone, the budgets that these companies have, it's $500 million a year per product. It's really getting out of control because they know that should the consumer want their product and go ask their doctor for it, they're going to get it 95% of the time. But then it goes beyond that. You also have them doing the same thing that BP is doing to lobby the government to lower restrictions to entry into the market, whether it's drugs that are being made outside the country, which have much different regulations that are required and being brought in. The whole story about Ranbaxy and having all of their plants in India shut down because the drugs that are coming into America aren't safe.
Well, what they count on, Seth, that's so apparent is that they focused. These people understand the mind of the American public, so they focused it, and they've understood that the typical American consumer has such low information about the truth that they feel if they tell the lie enough times, then the public buys into it. The statistics are overwhelming on this very topic. They went to areas like Pennsylvania and Ohio when the media started telling the story about how fracking, for example, was killing people by poisoning water. They came in, these organizations, these PR groups, we don't even know their names, where they live. They're just this dark little entity that comes in, and then they found that they could change public opinion by improving how people think about fracking, and then they moved the number something like 21%. It was amazing because the American public is so low information.
We hear those ads all the time here, Mike, in Colorado. How good fracking is, and they're put on by these grassroots organizations that that the ad is technically funded by, but it's really funded by the petroleum industry and the energy industry. They talk about saving jobs and growing the economy, and how fracking is good for the economy, and fracking is, getting that resource out of the ground is good for the American public, because they know that the American public will nibble on that cheese.
Yeah, and they further know, don't they, Seth, that the American media is so brain dead that the American media will never pick up on even what's going on. On the BP story, for example, on the Gulf Coast, you mentioned fracking in Colorado. On the BP story, you had agencies come in, and I mean the numbers that they were spending at one point was approaching something like $11 million a month to convince not just people that live here that BP was in the right, but to present that to the Supreme Court of the United States. They were trying to influence court opinion. That's what was so remarkable. It wasn't just trying to influence public opinion on the coast. They were really trying to influence the opinion of justices on the Supreme Court, justices in the Fifth Circuit, and they're further trying to discourage claimants from going forward with their claims, saying that it's fraud or whatever the issue may be. So this is something that is replacing lobbying, isn't it, Seth?
It definitely is something that's replacing lobbying. And, Mike, you mentioned that the API spent $300 million in PR. They spent $7 million in lobbying last year. I mean, the amount in lobbying is being dwarfed by the amount in PR. Why? Because the disclosures don't need to be made. You don't really know what's being done with the money, who's being influenced by the money, and it's this notion of soft lobbying that's being added on top of traditional lobbying. But the number of lobbyists in the country have decreased in the last 3 or 4 years because big business in America has figured out this other way to get around the requirements and the disclosures so that the American public knows who is behind the message.
We have a case up in Ohio against DuPont, and we're really looking at the opportunity to bring in the advertising agency who were part of lying to the public about the dangers of the product called C8, which was it was manufactured by DuPont. But if you think about it, if the ad agency is part of the cover-up, then I think you and people that do what you and I do should start bringing them into lawsuits, shouldn't we? Like the Ogilvy Group, maybe they certainly need to be brought in pharmaceutical cases.
If they are part of the, if they're complicit in making the false message, absolutely. But it's almost gotten to the point where it's just another piece of this country where the 1%ers and the wealthy are starting to control everything. They're controlling the message because it's who can spend more money.
Yeah, and so the average consumer out there that's taking a poison pill from somebody like Merck or Pfizer, they can't do a $7 million ad campaign, but the big agencies can. It is 1% versus the 99%. Seth, thank you for joining me. We'll follow this story a little bit more.
Thanks, Mike.
Monsanto's modified organisms have been linked to dozens of diseases, which is just another nail in the coffin for GMOs. But the chemical giant refuses to back down, and they appear to have the full support of the U.S. government. Joining me now to talk about that is Wesley Bowden. Wes, new studies on GMO. We've known all along that it was dangerous. We had some activist groups throughout the country that really laid it out for us year after year, saying this stuff will kill you. And now we find out that there's it's not only a lot of truth to it, it's right on the money. Tell us about these studies and what are they showing?
Well, Pap, the studies are showing that Monsanto specifically has engineered a variety of crops that are resistant to Roundup. And what they're doing with these crops is they've made it to where these crops now have a specific resistance to Roundup, and farmers are taking Roundup and just pouring it over their fields. And it's causing a lot of adverse health effects in the field workers and presumably people who are now eating these foods.
Well, explain some of the adverse findings that they're startling. Give me the short list.
Well, they're seeing all types of things ranging from kidney disease, inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, just a number of really devastating injuries for these people.
Well, one thing that was startling to me is they're actually saying that it affects the DNA signal in the human body. I mean, that's fairly severe because that causes all types of mutations in the human body. And I guess the worst thing about it is we have seen that Monsanto has known about this for a very long time, and now we're seeing these farm workers by the thousands who are they're mysteriously dying of kidney diseases. They're dying of ailments that can't really even be adequately diagnosed to understand what it is. And we now see that Monsanto has known about this, and they've had plenty of literature to tell them that they need to do something. But they've tried to cover it up, haven't they? I mean, explain what have they done?
Well, what they've maintained the entire time is that because of the specific way that Roundup interacts with the plants, that it's no longer harmful to humans. And so what they've done is they've taken Roundup and they put it on these plants, and it affects a specific mechanism in the plant's DNA, and they're saying that that's not harmful for humans. But we know that's not true because it is harmful to the bacteria that's in our guts and human guts. And so just because it's not necessarily impacting the DNA of humans, it is having an adverse effect because it's impacting the bacteria in our guts, which we rely on. These are bacteria that produce essential amino acids. Tryptophan is one that you're well aware of. It affects neuroreceptors in the brain. So there's information out there that says that some of these adverse effects may include autism in children. So I mean, the injuries that we're talking about are very wide-ranging and very vast.
23 diseases is this last study talks about 23 separate diseases that the GMO, the Monsanto connection is having. Okay, so now we have them spending millions of dollars to try to shut everybody up. Talk about what's happening throughout the country as far as Monsanto trying to shut up the people who are critics.
Oh, absolutely. In just the last 10 years alone, Monsanto has spent over $60 million in lobbying funds. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep GMO labeling off of our food products. And look at this, they've even hired, Obama has hired as his chief food czar a former Monsanto executive, Michael Taylor. And so Monsanto is going through everything they can, everything in their inventory to keep the FDA off their back, to keep the U.S. government from trying to regulate them, and to keep these products in our homes without letting us know about the dangers that are associated with it.
Well, I mean, if you look at the rest of the world, I mean, there's 64 countries around the world that they require labeling if it's a GMO product. They go and they say, you can't sell the product unless you tell somebody who's about to buy it and feed it to their children that it is a GMO product, no matter how small the content. Now, what's been the reaction in the United States where it comes to even labeling, even telling somebody that proceed with caution if you use this product?
It's gone absolutely nowhere, Pap. In 2001, the FDA put out a proposed labeling requirement for all companies to adhere to, and they have been soliciting comments. They've been soliciting comments now for 14 years with no regulation coming out. People are protesting it. People are trying to get the FDA to require this GMO labeling, but you can't compete as a voice, you and I, when you have Monsanto over here spending over $60 million to keep that warning, a small warning, just a label on the package that just says a sticker that says this product may contain genetically modified organisms. We've gone nowhere in this country.
Well, they've even gone as far. Right now, the big push is for immunity. In other words, if they didn't tell anybody how dangerous the product was, which is the situation, they've known about it for a very long time. They've had plenty of information here. But the next step it would be to say, well, can we go to Congress and can we get immunity? can we say that if this hurts somebody that we're going to try to get immunity, which they've done, they've tried to do, and they've been successful in making some inroads in that regard. But the real bothersome thing is when you go to a place like, say, Oregon, where they're very vocal in Oregon that we want to have some notice, that you at least have to have the decency to give us notice that the product is contaminated with a GMO, that ought to be something on the label. Tell us what the industry did up there in Oregon.
Oh, well, they just hid it. They just ignored the voices of people. They ignored the pressure politically, and they just did whatever they wanted to. Now we've got China and Japan are not accepting wheat shipments from Oregon, from all the wheat farmers out there, because Monsanto didn't even tell people that their wheat was genetically modified. So you had farmers growing fields, thousands and thousands of acres of wheat that they can't sell. They have to keep it domestically.
Yeah, I mean, even in China, they say, it's not like they have the highest health standards, but even China is saying, gee whiz, we don't want to buy this stuff because we've looked at it. We think it's extremely dangerous. But what's your take on the World Health Organization? I mean, if you think about it, this is an organization that's been active most of the time on critical issues like this. What kind of position has the World Health Organization taken?
Well, they've looked at it, and they're trying to encourage labeling of genetically modified organisms, and they're putting pressure on Monsanto, but they need to step up their game. I mean, we don't want to have another situation like we did with asbestos, where people knew about it for 2 decades before the government took any action, and then it took until the 90s until asbestos rebatement came on. We just can't afford to have that when we're talking about GMO, because this is stuff that we're feeding to our children, we're consuming it ourselves. They need to just step up the pressure, make sure Monsanto is letting people know about the health risk associated with genetically modified organisms, because these foods have been engineered to not be harmed by herbicides, and they're just absorbing this poison within the plant itself that we're now eating.
I got to tell you, Wesley, this is a story that it should take a lot. We need to pay a lot more attention to this. I think it's just starting to heat up because of these 2 new studies, but it's pretty terrifying. When you go online is what I'd recommend to the listeners, and take a look at these stories on the latest coming out. Wesley Bowden, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So, Pap, an interesting story this week, and there are, frankly, I mean, you see the convergence of both electoral politics in Israel, electoral politics, I guess, in this country as well, and also a major sort of war and peace issues. And I'm talking about the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu, apparently has been in negotiations with Speaker Boehner of the House to visit and give an address to a joint session of Congress. Now, this is not so bizarre, although Netanyahu has had an inordinate amount of visits of joint sessions. But, we can talk about those reasons. But what's really bizarre about it is, A, that Boehner offered this invitation without consulting with the White House. I mean, this is a major foreign policy issue and question. And simultaneously, the Israeli government never told the White House that they had accepted and negotiated this. So we had a situation where just about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago now almost, you had the ambassador to the United States, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, sitting down with John Kerry for a multiple-hour meeting and neglecting to tell him that his head of government, Bibi Netanyahu, was in negotiations and nearly completing negotiations, because it was announced a day later that he would be addressing a joint session of Congress. And I have to say, the politics of this are fascinating, both in Israel and in this country. But in this country, as you know, Pat, the president and the administration had negotiated a deal with Iran back in late 2013 that basically did three different things. It allowed for more investigation as to Iran's nuclear program, more oversight of it. It also allowed for significant setbacks to their nuclear program, and it gave more time for both parties to negotiate an extended final settlement. Now, this is one of the greatest fears of the neocons in this country, and frankly, members of the Democratic Party who have a large, significant right-wing Jewish and Israeli supportive supporters who give large donations. So just last week, you had Robert Menendez, Democrat in the Senate from New Jersey, coming out after the State of the Union and claiming that President Obama's, I guess, positive reports on the negotiations with Iran sound like they were drafted in Tehran. I mean, this is really shocking.
First, here, the suspect parts are, first of all, we know Netanyahu is here to start a war. I mean, that's the drill down. That's what it's about. We know the GOP does better when it is when they're in a war environment. That's when they get elected. That's when they gain most of their power, when they're in a war environment. Netanyahu knew why he was coming here. I mean, there was no question. He was coming here to chum up a war with Iran.
Right, because he's looking for people to vote to impose sanctions on Iran at a very sensitive time in these negotiations. So rather than let President Obama continue on with his negotiations, you have these right-wingers in the House and the Senate who, these war hawks, who want to impose more sanctions on Iran and essentially scuttle the talks.
I don't know that this has worked for him, Sam. I think that this was such an outrageous move that this chicken little Netanyahu, who's a scaremonger, he came here about Iraq in 2002, if you remember. His contribution was that, there's Saddam has missiles, Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. He was the chicken little they brought in then, and now he's back. Netanyahu has always been there talking about our need to escalate against places like Iran and Iraq. But the good news is the backlash is not going all that well for Netanyahu. First of all, you know that he's a war pimp. I know that he's a war pimp. But the average person, they hear Netanyahu, they think he has this really honorable background. He doesn't. The guy is just an absolute war pimp. Well, and so, of course, he's a perfect fit for the Republicans. Let's bring him in and be our talking head.
I'll tell you what's fascinating, Pap, is, and now we should also say that Boehner's not just working on a policy level. People have to remember that Sheldon Adelson, one of the reasons why he dumped tens of millions of dollars into the race, his two favorite issues are busting unions and also a very war hawk-like ultra-conservative perspective on Israel. Yeah. And when he pumped millions of dollars into the race in 2012, that was Newt Gingrich was carrying both of those banners. And
I'll tell you, Sam, I wouldn't be surprised if this goes right to Sheldon Adelson as getting Netanyahu.
I wouldn't doubt it at all. And here's the interesting thing. You have Democrats criticizing Boehner and almost ignoring Netanyahu in this because they are attacking the fact that this is really unprecedented to invite a leader, a head of a state to a joint session of Congress and not even inform the White House that you're contemplating it.
I mean, it sounds like treason. I mean, it has a kind of a treasonous sound about it, doesn't it? I mean,
here's the amazing. I agree with you, and the amazing thing is that you can watch Fox now, and they're attacking Bibi Netanyahu for doing something that they think is going to really hinder both Netanyahu at home and make him look bad in this country. But of course, they won't say anything about Boehner. Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, this is something that I think there's been such a big pushback on this that I'd be shocked or I should say, I wouldn't be shocked if there was some type of reversal. If we hear like, we've had a scheduling conflict, or Bibi can't make it at this point.
What they're doing right now is
this, in many respects, has had really the opposite effect, I think, of anybody who was Netanyahu looking for more bump in his domestic elections in Israel, which come from both this sense that he's welcomed in America, because I think that's more important in Israel than the Israelis let on. And
when
as you
Fox
say,
News doesn't welcome him, that's a problem. And I think,
Indeed.
Sam, as they keep building this case and talking about if Democrats will do what they typically don't do, and that is, they usually get ADD about this time and don't pursue it. But when they pursue it, they're going to find out it's private money bringing Netanyahu in. It's going to be like Sheldon Adelson, people like that.
So, Pap, of course, this week started off with the Iowa Freedom Summit, which is, there's a lot of these, it seems like, but this is like the first assemblage of one section of the ever increasingly, I don't know if the word is large or stuffed, GOP presidential 2016 clown car.
Oh yeah, it starts. You could go on forever just about what happened there. I mean, you have Huckabee proclaiming that God has told him to run again. You have Trump saying that
you think that God would have given him a little bit more encouragement, right?
From
maybe had him stay in the race a little bit longer.
Yeah, that would help. But what he does is he collects money. This is how the guy makes money. I mean, he collects money and then drops out of the race, and he lives for another year. Then Trump is out there. He's saying, I would have beat. He really did say this. I would have beat Obama in the last presidential election. That's what. But he says, you know what? I'm going to run possibly this time. So you'll have the benefit of all that, and that is if that really. It's like a slow burn stupid. I mean, you're watching. You're going. This is. The only way to describe it is slow burn stupid. But then then Sarah Palin, I don't know if you've followed this story, gets on stage, and you have to, anybody listening to this broadcast, you have to go listen to this. It is, when I saw it, it was almost as if I've seen when people are having a TMI. It is as if they're having this minor stroke and they've lost their way in the middle of the sentence. Now, we're used to hearing from Sarah Palin. I mean, if you remember, there's so many quotes. The one I love is, Todd's got the gun, Todd, her husband's got the gun, and I've got the rack. You remember that? I mean, what a classy thing for a presidential candidate to say. But now she's saying, I'm going to jump back in because I need to save this union. I need to save it from, from virtually, it goes through the list of how we're all at risk. But as you listen to this, I'm serious when I tell you she was either drunk, she was on drugs, or she was having something that is what you would call a TMI. Because what happened, all I can assume is that the teleprompter must have failed, and she starts rambling to the point to where the crowd is just almost starry-eyed thinking, what's happening up here? And what was your take on it?
Well, I mean, this is what's interesting is that, we've already now had, and we're only, 3.5, almost 4 weeks in, maybe January's over. It's 2015. We already have over a half dozen mostly declared Republican candidates. And right now it's looking, I think, like Good Money says there's going to be at least a double-digit amount of Republican candidates. But what looks like is going to be missing from this mix, although we're starting to hear a little bit from Carly Fiorina about this, is that it's quite possible. And the Republicans this week announced that they're only going to be doing 9, or supposedly only going to be doing 9 debates. There could be a dozen candidates, and all men, Pat. The Republican candidates are all going to be men. And so I think that the Republican Party still has this sort of notion of maybe Sarah Palin will run. Now, of course, she's not going to run. I know, and really any person with blood reaching their brain knows this is just a scam.
But explain, Sam, the listeners, how they make money doing this. This is what everybody misses. This is a money-making enterprise.
This is the amazing thing. You know, Pap, you and I, we grew up at a time where the conventional wisdom was like, you don't go and run for president unless you're serious, because you don't want to put your family through this. It's a grueling 9 months. You go around the country eating bad food, shaking a lot of hands. That notion of running for president is gone. What the Republicans do now is that running for president is essentially a marketing tour. I mean, you got to think about this as like why a band goes on to, used to go on tour. It was to promote their album. Well, when somebody goes and runs for president, or even teases that they're going to run for president, what that does is that means that they can build an email list, which means that they can either sell that email list to, dried food or emergency food or gold or, all sorts of male enhancement products. And they send out to these people. I mean, if you look at the audience, when Sarah Palin is in front of this audience saying, look, it's the Democrats who are really sexist and racist. And they cut to the audience, and it is literally, if you had gone in to a respite home and just take a shot of everybody eating there, that's what you would see. And so Sarah Palin collects these email addresses and these phone numbers and then begins to flog
Well, then
these
she
things.
comes out with her book,
And she comes out with her book, or she gets her reality TV show.
But it's a money.
I mean, look,
it's
we saw
a,
Gingrich do this. We're seeing Huckabee do this. We're seeing Ben Carson. We saw the Pizza Man. All of them.
But it's not only that, Sam. They build a war chest. You understand? They can
Of
live
course.
on the war chest. Once they have that money, they can do whatever they want to do with
Look,
it.
the Gingriches. They simply, for them, it was just Newt Gingrich said, like, this is great. Callista and I fly around the country. It is like a rolling vacation that they simply have to make a public appearance here or there. And it's, you can look at where these people are running, right? Like, how much time do people spend in, like, San Diego? Well, that's not really going to help you as a presidential candidate. I mean, this is
But it's good food, nice hotels,
good food.
jet.
You can have your campaign pay for it, and you build up an email list and sell your books.
Well, back to Sarah. Sarah's on stage, and I'm not kidding you. You've got to go watch this. If you're
People
listening,
should go to ringofireradio.com. We've got it posted up there, and it is. I have to say, Pap. I mean, generally, you and I don't spend a lot of time talking about Sarah Palin because
she's irrelevant.
Seeing
really.
one ridiculous
but you see, Sam, when people criticize you for talking about Palin, she's not news. She is news. Not Sarah Palin is the news, but Sarah Palin is indicia of what's happened to the Republican Party. That's the news. And when
frankly,
people write in, they say, why are you talking about it? Well, I mean, wake up. Freaking, wake up. Why are we talking about her? Because she is representative about how dysfunctional the Republican Party's become and how dysfunctional our democracy has become. So when these idiots write in on, why are you wasting time talking? It's important that people understand about how everything's crashing in on us.
Let me add
from
one
the standpoint
thing,
of politics.
It is important, if only to remind people that John McCain, the supposedly moderate of the Republican Party, put her in a position where she would be a heartbeat away from the presidency. And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the so-called moderates in the Republican Party and the dynamic of people say, like, well, I'm more of this part of the wing of the Republican. No, there's one wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, there's no wing.
And that is Sarah Palin's wing, because her wing forced John McCain to put her on the ticket. It just goes to show you how they govern and who pays to whom that the piper that they're following, I guess.
All about money.
So, Pap,
let's talk about crazy news, Sam.
Yes, indeed. Well, there's plenty out there, and it's not all just coming from the Iowa Freedom Summit, although there was a couple of things there we could actually touch on that I think is worth mentioning.
Oh, my God, you could do a whole show on just that summit. Did you see the Sandy Rios? Obama has embedded subliminal Islamic messages in his State of the Union address. Honest to God, this is a darling of the conservative movement.
Yeah,
she's the one that inspired the Bible-inspired anti-LGBT hate groups, the American Family Association, whatever the name of it is, and
Well, the American Family Association is a long-time, a Christian right organization that we remember back in 2012 when the leaders of these type of organizations met to decide whether or not Mitt Romney will be their nominee, and so this is an organization that carries a lot of authority in the Republican Party, and it is just stunning to see how much sort of durability these conspiracy theories have on the right.
Go on forever.
Let me
go ahead.
Who wants to deliver the quote here? Because this is so bat crap crazy, frankly.
Well, go ahead.
Right,
I love
this is what she said. She said that in the Islamic religion refers to pillars of Islam. In other words, pillars of, let's say, you could say pillars of Christianity, certain tenets which essentially undergird the religion. That doesn't sound terribly
but no, that
disturbing
understand
to me.
that's what she said was embedded subliminal Islamic message. I mean, she said this, and the point is, Sam.
This is what she said. There are other things he said that I caught, and he's done this before. There are 5 pillars of Islam, she tells us. And President Obama used the term pillars in his speech last night.
Yeah, but it was way crazier than that.
Are you kidding me?
It's way crazier than that. But you know why? Because understand, this woman is mainstream Republican.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not miss that. She is mainstream Republican. They are always out front raising money for whatever PAC is that has a Republican attached to it. But this is the same woman. She thinks Obama is a Muslim Marxist. She says that she feared Obama's food stamp program was designed to aid Islamists. That's why that's why she put it together. And it's not. And if you ask the leadership of the Republican Party, well, why don't you comment about this? They'll embrace her. Okay. And so but the point is this: when we have listeners say, why do you talk about Sarah Palin? Why do you talk about Ted Cruz? Why do you talk about these non-entities? They aren't non-entities. Understand, this woman is where we have moved to. It's, for example, Michelle Bachmann may be passing through, but then you've got this woman from Iowa that's moving back in. She's the new Michelle Bachmann, Joni Ernst. Mm-hmm. It's gotten to the point to where it's not just a phase. This is it. And so when I get these ridiculous emails, Paps quits talking about Sarah Palin. No, you have to understand this is where we are now. This is how dysfunctional things are, and it's not moving back. We won't go back. There is no center. There is no other wing of the Republican Party. This woman, Sandy Rios, is part of that leadership. They embrace her, and she says that Obama embedded subliminal Islamic messages
by using the word pillar in his speech, which what was amazing too is that President Obama, I believe, has actually installed multiple pillars in the front of the White House. I think you can look at which is also amazing. Let me just because I want to talk about this Dianne Feinstein story for a minute too. But we should also say, I think it's quite possible that this is the presidential election where the supposed moderate establishment don't even get to put up their candidate. They can't even.
Well, Jeb's their guy. You see, Jeb's their guy.
It very well may be, but I don't know that Jeb can get through the primary because the Republican Party.
He could win. He could win in a national election, but he can't get through the primaries.
I think you're right about that. All right, let's turn briefly, because we don't have too much time here, to Dianne Feinstein. This I find, this gets me just so angry. I know that that we've talked to David Dayen on this program in the past, a great journalist who's written extensively on how the post office could actually start to provide banking services to Americans who desperately need it. But instead, what we have is a postal service that is teetering on collapse. It doesn't take any taxpayer money. It's all funded through stamps. But we have Republicans back in 2006 instituted a law that said that the Postal Service had to fund its pension program 75 years in advance, which, of course, is ridiculous. Nobody has that requirement in business or in government. And so to make up money, the Postal Service is starting to sell off a lot of its buildings. And it turns out that Dianne Feinstein, her husband, Rich Blum, who is a real estate investment firm mogul, may earn as much as $1 billion in commissions for selling those U.S. Postal Service buildings. I mean, this is what turns people off.
Yeah, Bloom has been,
politics.
Feinstein's husband has been in the news many times about potential conflict issues, but this really takes it over the top. And again, to me is, okay, here's where we are. We have the Sarah Palins, the Ted Cruz on one side, and then we have the Wall Street Democrats on the other, the Dianne Feinsteins, the Schumers. We've got so where are we left? What are we left with? I mean, where do we go? And that's the thing that I think people are starting to realize now, whether it's the Democrats or Republicans. Yeah, are Democrats better than Republicans on social issues? Of course. You know, they're great on same-sex marriage and gender issues and race issues. They're terrible on issues like we're talking about right here, where it comes to taking money from the middle class and giving it to more millionaires. They are Wall Street Democrats. So that's the nature of where we are now.
Well, I'm sure we will touch on that in the weeks to come, but we're out of time now, Pap. As always, a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Sam. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.